GlobeTrotting is closing in on 40,000 subscribers. If you haven't already, it would certainly mean a lot if you hit that button. The Airbus A380 has undergone many ups and downs in recent history, from an aircraft type that most would have ruled out a return to for the industry to eventually coming back in numbers, with carriers more so scrambling to find ways to meet demand levels being seen. But what is the aircraft's actual status at its airlines that it flies with? Are the carriers that have returned the aircraft to service all for show, and it's more a short-term solution, or do some of these airlines actually have plans for the series to remain for some time? Let me explore some of those questions and much more. I could do this alphabetically, but to keep you on your toes, I'll do it in random order. Beginning with British Airways. The London Heathrow-based airline returned the A380s to service following the global pandemic, and utilises the aircraft on a host of global missions. The CEO during the height of the pandemic confirmed that the aircraft was still going to play an integral part of the airline's operations long into the future. And currently, at the time of recording, British Airways stands as one of the few airlines you could say that doesn't necessarily have a timeline on retirement, and still actually enjoys flying the world's largest passenger plane, something that feels like it's becoming rarer and rarer. Asiana Airlines is next, and it's safe to say that they're front and centre following an upcoming merger with Korean Air that's in the works. While future fleet decisions thanks to this merger do remain unknown as the tie-up continues to go on, currently the airline still utilises the services of the 380. However, very similar to a host of other airlines, it won't be flying this type forever, with discussions in recent years, and especially with the reputable Flight Global, revealing that the plan would be to remove the 380s in the next 5 years. This means that it wouldn't likely fly past 2026. Comments coming from the CEO at the time of Korean Air. You may think to yourself, how does this correlate to Asiana Airlines given I've just mentioned Korean Air's CEO? Well, given that the pair are set to come together, at least that is the plan at the moment, it would be pretty hard to believe that they would intend to, say, retain the Asiana 380s, given the brand is likely to disappear and, say, keep the Korean ones. The Asiana A380's fate does almost intertwine with what Koreans' broader plan for the series is. Yes, they both returned the world's largest passenger plane to service to meet demand, but unlike the first airline I covered, which was British Airways, it really has already outlined plans to remove the type for good, and given two airlines merging with two sets of A380s, you can't imagine that they'll continue. Moving down further south to Qantas within Australia, their operations follow a pretty similar pattern to that of British Airways, as the airline was forced into an early retirement of the 747s during the pandemic. This removed potential future capacity options, and naturally another widebody from their fleet. So the carrier always pretty much claimed that the A380 was a vital aircraft, never shying away from that stance. And since demand has returned, the aircraft has arrived back on Australian shores in numbers, and are now deployed worldwide, acting as a pretty essential solution to markets that are requiring additional seats. Qantas, however, will look to replace the A380s from 2032 onwards, as guidance with the arrival of 12 recently ordered Airbus A350-1000s. This is still some time away, so while they're an airline that has revealed the retirement plans for the A380 series, it doesn't mean it is, say, an immediate or short-term retirement. You can expect the A380 to be flying with Qantas for well over the next decade. Emirates is the largest aircraft operator and accounts for most A380s airborne today. They will also be equally likely to be one of the last flying the series, with the intent to keep them active long into the 2030s. This is primarily down to just how perfect the aircraft has been for the Dubai-based carrier in achieving its growth goals. They are one of the few airlines, when taking a look at the global aviation industry, that has actually made the plane work in almost every single aspect. At the time as well, there is no other aircraft that really offers improved efficiency that can adequately replicate what Emirates is doing with the A380, therefore retaining it for as long as possible, but also aligning with their core business value of keeping their fleet young does become the focus here. Some A380s have remained parked following the pandemic, but these have been the oldest units, with the newer ones flying currently. Lufthansa is among the next part of the video segment, which I like to label more so related to airlines that believed they didn't have a future with the respective aircraft, but then it turned around. Lufthansa announced the sale of multiple units during the height of the pandemic. While retaining some, they were indeed parked, and executives' indications really highlighted to us that the type wouldn't return. They had no plans for this plane. Instead, they would look to prioritize other next-generation aircraft. Well, with the substantial and you could say pretty rapid return in global demand, the airline was left with no choice, and pair that with delays to inbound wide-bodies such as the 777X, the A380 once more became a pretty attractive option, and it's been rolled out across the network in the past few months, and will continue to do so up until 2025, with every few months the airline adjusting its guidance and saying that more A380s would return than initially announced. The expectation is, though, that they still won't stay probably as long as your Qantas, British Airways, or Emirates, as their future will very much be determined by when wide-bodies, such as the ones aforementioned, can arrive. Etihad Airways also returned the A380 to service. These units aren't the oldest and are at the moment strictly being deployed to London Heathrow, a substantial capacity increase to a city that Etihad sees as a crucial destination. However, it is one of two Middle Eastern carriers that returned the aircraft to service, maybe more reluctantly than others. The other one is Qatar Airways, and they're probably the standout for their general hatred of the aircraft. That's always stood true, even before the pandemic. I think the emergence of the restrictions and a plane like the A380 being with them has only heightened their disapproval of it. But they've been forced to return the aircraft to service. When I say forced, it's because Qatar Airways would have been delighted seeing the back end of this series, but with demand skyrocketing, it had to return it to service. They needed the capacity. And because of continued delivery delays, these are active, but probably not for much longer. Per Akbar Al-Baker, they will be in service until they can be permanently retired, with the first availability to do so when they will act. ANA is the second last airline to cover. They operate only 3 aircraft with service to Honolulu, and they are 3 of the newer units that were produced. Retirement plans for this aircraft with this airline haven't necessarily been laid out. Following the pandemic and resurgence in demand, there is a usage for the A380 for ANA, and long may the Flying Turtle continue to operate. Singapore Airlines is last on the list. Their history has been a bit more eventful, with the first A380 built being returned after 10 years of service. In fact, prior to the pandemic, they were already making changes to their A380 operations. It has generally, though, seemed to prolong the plane's life, as Singapore is investing a substantial amount of funds to improve the passenger experience on the plane, and elevate the general perception that the public has for the product, with a view, no doubt, to keep them active for a considerable period to utilise on routes that they need for capacity. What are your thoughts on the status of the A380 within the aviation industry? You'll notice that I didn't mention a host of other airlines that previously flew the aircraft, because it is my intention, if it's something you'd like to see, to one day take a look at those airlines that retired it in the past couple of years, their reasoning, and maybe what happened to those units. Thanks for watching, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.